the informed investor. Thanks to Century 21. Smarter, bolder, faster. Go to century21.com.au.
Yes, we're very lucky to have in the studio with us Charles Tarbey, who's the chairman of Century 21 Australasia. Nice to talk to you again, Charles.
Yeah, good evening, Steve.
Elections are never good things for real estate. It seems that people put things on hold and wait and try and see what's going to happen when there's a change of party, particularly when you've got a federal election coming up in May, and it looks like we will get the Labor Party in. But I note today that there's been some number crunching done on development in Sydney. We get a lot of calls about this all the time, about whether we're overcrowded and whether we've let too much stuff be built. Interestingly, the ABC did this analysis of 28 years of data from the New South Wales Department of Planning. Boy, that would have been a dry exercise to go through. It would have been dreadful to have to do this research, but we've pinched it, and I would like your opinion on it, because part of the figures show the majority of development has been concentrated in Sydney's west and southwest, in councils like Canterbury, Bankstown, Liverpool, Blacktown, Parramatta and the Hills Shire. How have those places changed in your time in real estate?
Oh, it's been quite incredible. When I looked out, go back out to Camden as an example, that's where the airstrip was. If you were a trainee pilot, you landed on the grass strip there and did a touch and go and took off out to Schofields and landed out there, and there was nothing much out there at all. It's just beautiful farms. And, of course, the M7 freeway really opened up that entire area right across when you the Oran Park racetrack, all through there, Leppington, all the way down. I remember my auntie and uncle had a 5-acre property out of Leppington, and you really didn't go there unless you're going to visit
wish you
somebody.
still had it.
Yes, I know. we often talk about that, because I did bump into some people who bought 5 acres there, and their father bought it, and amazingly enough, they ended up building the railway station just behind them. And from a 5-acre piece of land that they paid a reasonably small amount for, it ended up being something that they could build hundreds of apartments on. And so those areas have been quite a few people who are farmers out there that have become significantly wealthy people because of that. But Steve, a lot of that development happened out there, apart from the airport, Badgerys Creek being touted for so long, the M7 and so on. But most of those areas, apart from, say, Ryde, where there's been a lot of development there, they're connected to freeways, very close to freeways, but there's large blocks of land, whereas in Sydney, in the inner west or in the eastern suburbs, the blocks of land aren't that large in comparison. And so it's natural that they would be able to do a great deal more in those areas from a development.
Are we building the right stuff?
Look, a lot of it has been rushed. It's been because there's been opportunity. I remember being on Sky Business, 10 years ago, talking about the fact that by 2020 we needed to have over 200,000. We were going to have a shortfall of over 200,000 homes just in Sydney alone, if the councils didn't stop the red tape and if there was more development allowed. So it really opened up, and probably to some of these councils' detriment right now, because they're starting to build areas, or in some of those areas, they're turned into a little bit of a ghetto.
The issue in Brisbane as well. What's the Brisbane market doing? I note the clearance rates at the weekend there. Last time last year was 47.7, so it wasn't great. And it's dropped down to 31.3.
Yeah.
There's probably some good bargains in Brisbane now, aren't there?
Look, yeah, Brisbane has never been a great recorder for auctions. So it's been unlike Melbourne or Sydney, but there are some fantastic areas, particularly in the apartment side, because there is definitely an oversupply in those parts. But other parts of Brisbane are still strong. Other parts of Brisbane are still growing in terms of value. If you push your way up to North Lakes and all the way up through Strathpine, out to Redcliffe and those areas, you're still close to the city. You've got transport. You've got a beautiful lifestyle. And you're still close to the city of Brisbane, and you can still buy properties in some of those areas for $400,000 to $500,000, brand new. And I think that those markets, such as Brisbane and Adelaide, as an example, didn't go through that massive price increase that Sydney and Melbourne did. And this is why I think they're still stable and there's still growth in some of those areas.
So if you were thinking about leaving Sydney or Melbourne, Brisbane and Adelaide would be your two picks at the moment.
Yeah, and I as I mentioned before, I never talked about Brisbane. Everybody was talking Brisbane up, and I think they were talking it up way too early. And I think now, given that Sydney and Melbourne are having their battles, and you look at what's happened in Brisbane, where the price increase has been very, very slow in comparison, I think you have opportunity for sure.
What were the clearance rates in the rest of the country like on the weekend?
Yeah,
I mean, we did have a long weekend in Victoria, so that would have
that would
been
have
a problem.
impacted, of course. Yeah, there was only 215 auctions compared to the usual, 1,000 auctions that go on in Victoria. But Sydney's a good gauge. It hit 58.2%, 702 auctions. This time last year it was 62.2. So Sydney's really come of age.
Bounced back.
I read an article the other day also about Sydney and some of the areas that there's less stock on the market. That's just not correct. There's more stock on the market. I know people don't like to sell in a quiet market, but there's still a lot of stock on the market right now in comparison to this time last year. And then I read another article where the banks are saying that, look, they haven't tightened their lending. There's no issues there. We don't see why people are complaining. And I have the greatest respect for our banks, especially during the GFC. They held their own. But I from personal experience, I know the banks have changed their lending patterns. So I'm not buying into the concept that they're not doing anything any different. I believe they very much are.
Yeah, we're getting lots of anecdotal evidence that people, even renegotiating loans has become fraught with danger.
Yeah, this is a great time for people to buy, and amazingly, the banks aren't as flexible. It's just, you get these first home buyers, they can't win a trick. Before, the prices were too high and affordability was an issue. Now affordability is becoming less of an issue, but they can't get the money.
And you've got to have a 20% deposit. You've got to prove what your credit card debt's like and what your spending habits are. They go through a really tough interview process, don't they?
Absolutely do, and they talk about investors aren't applying for loans. Well, investors were shunned for quite some time. You don't push people away and then all of a sudden expect them to come rushing back. But again, equity is not king anymore. So people who are buying out there, investors alike, it's very hard for them to get the loans that they were able to get a few years ago when they were able to use their equity, Steve.
Exactly right. Charles, always a pleasure to catch up with you, mate. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Steve. Good
Charles Tarby there, who is the chairman of Century 21 Australasia, talks more sense about real estate than just about anybody in